welcome to another episode of our podcast called Elevating Learning. We're very excited to have a special guest today on our show. Her name is Maricel Perez Lovisolo, and she has been an international learning leader for over 20 years. Particularly, she has deep experience working in the professional services industry with companies such as Deloitte, IBM Global, and PwC, as well as other companies. She's presently the Vice President of Learning at TELUS International. And we're really excited to hear some of her insight from a global perspective. You know, how things are different working in, let's say, in Europe or here in the Americas or South America or even Asia Pacific. I'm going to ask Maricel to give us a little background where she started her education and her parents and a little. And for those younger people in our audience who are interested and who are listening in, I think it's going to be exciting to hear how Maricel moved up through the ranks of learning and became a learning leader. So pay close attention to that. And let me turn it over to Maricel for some really insightful information. Maricel.
Thank you for having me, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here to spend some time talking about learning and elevating learning with you, which is my passion. So first, let's start with being thankful, right, for having found my passion and also be able to, work every day with other practitioners in this wonderful field to be able to work in. A little bit about how I came to be a learning leader. Sometimes I reflect very, very early on in my life. I remember I was probably 8 and I was shown a matrix, right, by a teacher. I think it was 4th grade or 3rd grade. And I remember the pleasure of seeing a model that helped me organize the world, right? So it was a very simple matrix where we had to, I think it was the weather, and we had, the clouds and the type of weather by type of day or day of the week. And that was like an eye-opening. Oh, you can organize life. You can organize, social things that you don't normally think you would be able to organize, but you can organize that in your mind through a model. And for me, that's something that has been with me all my life. Very beginning of my career, I didn't know I wanted to be a learning leader, but I studied law and I studied political sciences. And it is related to that drive of organizing, right? Organizing dynamics, organizing groups. So if you go back to political sciences, has to do a lot with sociology. So I didn't know I was going to become a learning leader, but I think the passion and my values to help others organize themselves, grow, avoid some conflicting dynamics in the way they deal with others, and really help them excel by working better with others and also understanding themselves better and continue to learn. I think that was very, very deep rooted in my life.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little about your educational preparation, how that prepared you for your future role as a learning leader?
So you asked about the working across different cultures and being a global leader. I was born in Argentina. I moved to Spain when I was a teenager. So I think that really modeled me to be very aware of the cultural differences, right? In terms of my education, as I said, I studied law. My first master was in law. Then I studied at the same time in parallel political sciences and sociology, because I was really looking forward to understand the world through people, understand how people dynamics shape the world. Then I started working for PwC. And there I was very lucky because although I started working in one of our verticals in the telecommunications space, I could start to work in cross-functional teams with a very important change management and learning element. And there is where I discovered this is where I want to be. I'm not so focused in, our deliveries in terms of a feasibility study for the telecom company. I was more interested in everything that took to get to that deliverable through working with the team. And I was very, very fortunate because PwC at that time, and still today is a learning leader, right? It's a company that is very focused on the knowledge, the expertise of their people, and they focus a lot. A lot of what they do is focusing on accelerating those career paths. So I was in the right place at the right moment. And I would say in terms of preparation, I always been learning on the job, right? On the job, plus being a very strong self-directed learner, with the fortune of working for companies where learning was very, very strong. So I had great colleagues, great masters, great coaches. From PwC, I went to IBM. And again, IBM, a learning leader, right? So we had career paths for learning practitioners, wealth of information, wealth of directed learning opportunities, together with working with fantastic professionals in this field. So I would say my education prepared me, at a very ground level, right? Because it gave me a lot of models, a lot of understanding of statistics, understanding of group dynamics, but the specific learning, the learning profession, I've learned on the job.
Was there anything that sticks out in your mind when you're going through university that really influenced you towards, let's say, making a career in learning, or did nothing really happen at all, and it was more that you slowly transitioned into the path of working within the learning department within your past companies?
So I discovered that was my passion, right? So I was always, within a project team, I was always the person doing the knowledge transfer, helping others, helping people develop, finding new sources of information. So I discovered that passion, and then I had the opportunity at IBM to become a learning manager. So I applied for this position, and one of the things that has helped me in my career all my life is I've always been very, very business focused, because I started working as a business consultant. The strategy, the business focus is always my first filter to think about anything, any strategy, any plan, any program I'm developing. I'm always thinking about, how is this going to impact the business strategy? And that is what I brought to my first learning interview, right? To become in my very, very first learning manager position. When they looked at me and they looked at my strengths, at that time I didn't have probably the strengths of the learning profession, right? But I had a very, very strong business acumen. And that business acumen was what I think was key for me, right? To show at that moment, but also to continue to nurture throughout my whole career, right? It's not one or the other. You have to have both. You have to have the business acumen. You have to be able to be that trusted business advisor. Show your leaders you understand their business. You're helping them with learning initiatives and programs and interventions, but at the end of the day, they are focused on a business outcome. So yeah, I think that is something that has helped me from the very beginning when I got my first learning job, but is something that I nurtured every day.
Fascinating. So let's talk for a moment about your role at Deloitte, for example. From my experience, having worked deeply with them over my career on a global basis, they really put a lot of effort into developing individuals. And you had a senior manager role for a number of years out of Amsterdam, if I got that right. But
Rotterdam, and yeah, it's close
right,
by.
right. And so you got the opportunity to travel around the world in different locations, deliver learning, and how do things look differently to you when you deliver? Let's say, well, you're not in the delivery point, but work with your offices in Europe as opposed to coming or going to South America or Latin America, or how's it different? The structure and how things look that way.
I think I love that question, Brian, because that's something I always think about, right? Um, and for me, there are two things. One is the corporate culture and the corporate dynamics, and the other one is the culture itself of the country or the region, and those two intertwine. So it's not one or the other. Um, my perspective is that the company culture can have a very, very strong impact in the local culture. So I would say that, depending on the company. So Deloitte will have a very, high standard for learning and the whole onboarding process and how people fit into the company. I think that's such a strong company culture that almost anywhere in the world is you can work in a very familiar Deloitte way, right? There are other companies. The company I work for right now, TELUS International, we are very strong in our regions. So we are small in North America. So our regional differences, I think, are bigger, right? We are almost more embracing those regional differences and nurturing them, as opposed to have more of a kind of a global model or a global standard, right? So I think it depends very much by company, by the type of corporate culture you want to nurture. And so those are big differences. If I talk about what I really like about in my role right now is that we have very, very young learning practitioners working from the Philippines, working from India. And what I love in my current job is the ability to work with very talented, very young practitioners that are so much willing to learn. And so I'm able to infuse all the great things I learned with Deloitte, and they're so eager to learn and to develop. And that's really fascinating because, again, the standards of a Deloitte, of an IBM, are difficult to replicate, but it's possible if you have that willingness to learn that I have with my teams today.
I like the whole discussion around corporate culture. Having spent my career consulting in a lot of different companies, some experiences weren't that good. Where you would go in and you would want to help them, perhaps give them advice about better methods or techniques to be used in developing their people, and best practices from other companies, how it might help them. And some companies, their culture is like standoffish. I don't need your help necessarily. We are managing it. There's other companies like TELUS International where the absorption rate, like, give me more knowledge, tell me more things, is really exciting from a learning perspective. Us people have spent our lives in learning. So that whole culture thing's probably a huge discussion to have at a later date, but always fascinated to hear more and more from people with your tremendous amount of insight. So I'm wondering, hearing you talk about TELUS and the globalness of it and different practitioners around the globe, could you share with our audience one or two problems that you're trying to overcome within your organization from the learning perspective, helping the business?
Yes, very, very due question. We started talking about the need to be business focused. And when you work for a very big organization with a lot of stakeholders, sometimes it's difficult to have the right interlocks for them to make the right decisions. So I want to be more transparent. I want to give my leaders at TELUS International, the ability to influence, to make decisions, to make educated decisions about our strategy, about our plans for 2020 and beyond. And so that's a lot of different layers within the organization you need to talk to, you need to orchestrate. How do I have the right governance structure? And that doesn't ask for a lot of time for the business because everyone is super busy. So we don't want to pull them out and have very bureaucratic processes and decision-making mechanisms, but we want to have the right touch and the right moments to spend with them, to share all what we know, all what we hear from our learners, from our leaders at different levels within the organization, the opportunity to influence and to make sure that they feel this is their strategy, right? It's not my strategy. It should be the strategy that helps us realize the overall TELUS International strategy. And so that is right now something I'm working on. We have different models that we can use for better governance. steer committees, different levels of focus groups, aggregating the feedback we're getting. But life and learning goes at the speed of light these days. So how you keep connected? Well, trying to get all that feedback and act on that feedback very, very quickly. So that's my current challenge.
Yeah, interesting. And in a prior conversation with you, Maricel, one of the issues that most organizations are confronted with is the challenge of employees' available time to pursue new learnings. Of course, within the learning industry, we're trying to overcome that with little snippets of learning or micro learning, as it's called, and just making it available briefly. And you had mentioned that's a challenge, like anyone else. Uh, what are you doing at your organization to attempt to move the stone forward of practitioner learning, or rather employee learning?
Yeah, for me, it's almost like a two-path strategy. On one hand, yes, we need to embrace marketing techniques to get people's attention, right? For 5 minutes, for 2 minutes, right? Little nuggets, messaging. There are things that we can communicate that is just one sentence and yet has a lot of impact. Just to give you an example, in one of our last senior leadership forums, one of the, we call it a culture hack, is very easy to remember and can have a lot of impact in the organization. And that mantra was something like, don't fall in love with the solution, fall in love with the problem. By this, we mean that sometimes within the company, people come up with a system, a process, and they just focus on converting everyone to doing what they think is right. But that, maybe it's just their own bias way of looking at the solution. Also, it gets difficult to convert people if they have not been part of those discussions. So let's not focus so much about the quick solution. Let's create a space where we discuss about the problem, right? And from that common understanding, yeah, maybe my solution is the right one, maybe it's not, but it doesn't really matter, because what we are trying to do is to solve that problem. So that's one example of quick hacks that we can do learning wise at this, at a very high speed. On the other hand, we need to take time to learn, right? So there are quick hacks, but there's also the need to slow down and to plan time for learning in a deeper level. So other thing we are doing is, to really share the idea of, the need to take time down from your busy schedule to focus on what really matters and to focus on the future. And you are not able to focus on the future if you are just dealing with the day-to-day and the craziness. So we are really trying to make people aware that if they want to be resilient for learning at the speed of life and flow, and we call it learning at the speed of operations, they need to slow down and they need to concentrate and they need to take time to read and, plan time in your calendar for 1 hour of self-directed learning. And that's I think a habit that we need to create.
I totally agree with you. And many people struggle with that, setting time aside and focus on the learning and knowledge that they need for the job and how it will help them. But as we finish up here, Maricel, I'm wondering, is there any, and I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but is there, through your career, any little, what I term a pearl of wisdom that you have that you would like to share with the audience?
So my pearl of wisdom would be always show that you're ready for the next challenge, right? Always be prepared, because you don't know when the opportunity is going to come. But if you're prepared, if you are continuously showing that you're ready for the challenge, if you focus on the results, don't focus on yourself, don't focus on profiling yourself, focus on having that attitude of helping others, right? For me, that's learning, right? We succeed through others. So if you continuously focus on that, advancing the business outcomes of your company, helping others succeed, I think you have chances of being successful yourself, and it's also so much more fun, right? So I would say, be ready, be always showing that you are up for the challenge. and maybe less focus on yourself, but focus on others, right? Because when you make others succeed, then you succeed yourself in learning.
Wonderful, wonderful advice. And thank you for sharing your pearl of wisdom. I'd like to thank our audience for joining us today, and thank Maricel for joining us and sharing her insight. I picked up a lot of little pearls from the chat with you today, Maricel, and thank you for that. And I hope the audience did too. Thank you to Jordak Consultants for sponsoring this podcast, and we look forward to bring you another learning leader in our next podcast coming up in the next couple of weeks. So enjoy, share this information in this podcast with fellow practitioners, and let's continue to elevate learning in our organization. Thanks, and have a great day.